They did not simply buy seeds, they bought the world's largest agricultural intelligence network. The nations with the most data wanted no rules. The nations with the least had no leverage. The nations with the least had no leverage. They measured the destruction of the land. Then they sold the measurement. Global grain models missed the war. Global grain models missed the war in Ukraine. Or perhaps someone already knew the outcome. They saw drought before governments did. And then they traded on it. Every crop failure could be predicted. But not by the people living there. Food intelligence now lives in servers. Turn access off, planning collapses. Their own fields, someone else's database. A mosaic of lost rice crops seen from above, unable to access their own national crop data. A nuclear power planning its future, planning crops with borrowed intelligence. As the water stress index rises, crisis in the Indus Valley wheat fields. The question wasn't who grows food, it was who controls the data. Food logistics became military intelligence, the most powerful military adding agricultural data to its mission. On the borders of strategic power, India realized it all too late. India realized it all too late. Control the agricultural crop data, control the national governments themselves. Vulnerability mapped across the Indo-Pacific. Supply chain arteries now mapped and monitored. Farmers finally asked one question: who owns the data? Who actually owns the data? Who actually owns the extracted data? Justice moving at institutional speed. The machine was theirs, the data wasn't. Autonomous machines governed by distant servers. The extracted data was never theirs. A farmer watching the extraction from the road. Farmers testifying in a chamber designed for their protection. 47 pages of extraction rules. The extraction process continued regardless. A building designed for citizen protection, failing once again. Data rights became land rights. Europe erupted. Europe erupted. Data rights became land rights. Thousands of tractors paralyzed the European quarter. For the first time, data returned value to the farmer, building the first farmer data cooperative. Farmer data owned collectively, licensed commercially. from smallholders in the north to the markets in Lagos. A section of intelligence that did not exist before. The Cold War never ended. It moved into the soil. Analysts mapping foreign crop patterns for insight. Langley, Virginia, tracking harvests alongside missiles. You could borrow the money. Officials reviewing digital agriculture project proposals. The money came with conditions on the data. Smiling officials announcing a package of modernization. The empire of agricultural data is built. Ministers from 12 nations review the treaty. Now the world decides whether to fight back. The Earth from orbit, fragile and data dependent. The most powerful weapon on Earth isn't a missile. It is a data set, a vast silent harvest of information. And somewhere in a field near you, it's already been planted. The harvest has begun, you just don't know it yet. Every seed planted, every rainfall measured, every yield predicted. Data companies now know more about your nation's food than your government does. This is not agriculture anymore. This is surveillance with soil. In developing nations, agricultural data is the new oil. Foreign tech companies are drilling deep. And the royalties? They go nowhere near local farmers. The colony has a new name. The cloud. China holds crop forecast data for 47 nations before those governments even run their own models. A digital harvest of intelligence flowing through silent corridors of fiber and light. This is not a technology story. This is a story about the machinery of power, a global grid of surveillance mapping the future of food from thousands of miles away. When agricultural data is weaponized, famines don't just happen by drought. They happen by design. They happen by algorithm, a digital death sentence for the market executed in milliseconds. The nations that don't own their crop data won't own their futures. The fight has begun. This is the story they don't want you to understand. The silent watchers are always on. In 2012, John Deere launched its Operations Center. The day the field went digital, farmers uploaded every variable of their land: soil, seeds, weather, and the coming yield. They thought they were getting smarter farming, better yields, higher profits. They were building someone else's empire. The terms were buried in the software agreement, a silent surrender of every acre. Deere retained the right to aggregate and analyze all farm data, a corporate sovereign. Millions of acres, millions of data points, controlled by a few, all flowing into one private platform, a silent harvest of the heartland. Agricultural data flows directly into commodity markets, a river of intelligence. Hedge funds trade on crop yields before the farmers know their own numbers. The game is rigged at the data layer, a digital block on the supply chain. And the house always wins, the data ensures it. Bangladesh loses 17% of its arable land to flooding annually, a nation underwater. Yet the real-time data to anticipate and manage those losses is owned offshore, a gap of power. Government planners work blind, while the servers see the coming storm. While foreign servers see everything, watching the water rise from afar. Silicon Valley built the backbone of the global food intelligence network, the architects of the new harvest. Companies like Climate Corporation, Granular, Trimble Agriculture, learning from the soil. Combined, they hold soil and yield data for over 500 million acres, a global footprint. None of it is regulated by the United Nations. Power without borders. Europe began pushing back first, gathering in the digital trenches. The EU's farm-to-fork strategy raised alarms about data sovereignty, a refusal to be a digital colony. Who owns the digital soil of European agriculture? The question echoes in Brussels. The debate has no clean answer, only the weight of history and the pull of the future. Egypt feeds 105 million people from one of the most data-poor agricultural systems on Earth. Its crop forecasting depends on American satellites and Chinese AI platforms, a fragile reliance. When the data is wrong or withheld, breadlines form. This is the reality. That is not a metaphor, that is policy, executed on the ground. The most valuable agricultural data sets in the world are not public, they are gold. They're monetized, sold to hedge funds, insurers, and foreign governments. Data for the highest bidder. A Kansas drought becomes a Tokyo financial event, moving at the speed of light. Before the Kansas farmer even knows his crop is dead, the market has already moved on. Every combine harvester is now a data collection unit, moving across the digital field. Each pass logs soil compaction, moisture, yield, and GPS coordinates, a digital footprint of the harvest. The farmer drives, the data flows upward, a golden stream of intelligence. To servers the farmer will never visit, a vast, invisible network of control. India grows food for 1.4 billion people, a monumental feat of agriculture. Yet, 83% of Indian farmers have no access to precision agriculture data, a digital wall. Foreign platforms have richer data sets about Indian crops than India's own government, a trade imbalance of data. The world's largest democracy is farming in the dark, while cities glow with data. Cargill, ADM Bunge, Louis Dreyfus, the giants that move the world's grain. The ABCD companies control 70 to 90% of global grain trade. They are the market. And they all run on proprietary data pipelines that governments cannot access, hidden from view. The food supply chain is a black box, and they hold the key. Decisions made in silence. Agricultural data doesn't just monitor existing farms, it looks for more. It identifies the next frontier for expansion, mapping the untapped potential. The Amazon is not being deforested randomly, it is being cleared by data. It's being data mined before it's land mined, a digital invasion of the forest. The agricultural data industry is now a $10 billion market, a growing empire, growing at 13% annually, a rapid acceleration of control. It will touch every nation that grows, trades, or imports food. No one is exempt. Which is every nation on Earth. The grid is everywhere. Water scarcity is the next agricultural crisis, the liquid gold of the future, and the data layer is already positioned to exploit it. Every drop accounted for. When water rights are tied to data, who controls the data controls the water. Deep beneath the soil, the depletion is tracked. California figured this out too late. The water is gone, but the data remains. In 2022, food supply became a weapon, a lever of pressure against the world. But the data war had started years earlier, a silent buildup of intelligence. Satellite imagery, yield forecasts, logistics algorithms, all militarized. Weapons of food. Food is no longer just food. It is geopolitical ammunition, fired from orbit. South Africa's 2018 water crisis was predicted by private data companies 6 months in advance. That data was not shared with the government. It was kept for profit. It was sold to agricultural insurers. Profit from the coming drought. Profit before people. Data before drought relief. The sky is filled with watchers. French farmers launched La Guerre des Données, the data war, a battle for the soil, refusing to upload field records to corporate platforms, reclaiming their digital heritage. The resistance was real, but the power gap was larger, a wall of iron against the cloud. Monsanto had more field data than the French Ministry of Agriculture, the new sovereign. China nationalized its agricultural data strategy in 2020, a state-led harvest. All farm data generated in China stays in China, locked behind the digital Great Wall. The government runs its own crop intelligence satellites, a sovereign shield, and uses that data to preemptively buy grain before global prices spike. Dominance by foresight. Agricultural data has become the pre-trade currency, the new oil. Knowing crop forecasts before the market knows is worth billions, a digital gamble. It is also technically legal, a structural advantage built into the code, and deeply structurally unfair, the weight of the world's grain on a digital scale. At the FAO, the debate is not yet about data ownership, it is about awareness. It is still about whether the problem is acknowledged, a voice crying in the digital wilderness. Meanwhile, private platforms have already mapped every arable acre on Earth, an empty room of debate. The institutions meant to protect nations are 3 steps behind, while the world burns. In 2023, the Pentagon classified agricultural data as a national security concern, a new front line. For the first time in American history, the defense of the field begins here. Hackers from 3 nations had attempted to breach USDA crop forecast systems, a digital siege. The food supply had become a cyber war target, a battle for the breadbasket. Automation didn't just remove the farmer from the field, it changed the game. It removed the nation from its own food intelligence, a mechanical takeover. When machines harvest the data, who writes the national food policy, the silence of the fields? Whoever owns the algorithm, the new ghost in the machine. The WFP now uses commercial agricultural data platforms to predict famine, a reliance on the private. They pay licensing fees to access crop intelligence for their own humanitarian operations, paid famine relief. This is the new normal, the UN paying Silicon Valley to feed Africa. Something has gone catastrophically wrong. Private equity has discovered agricultural data as an asset class. Funds buy and aggregate farm data platforms to create vertically integrated food intelligence empires, a new monopoly. The farmer is the last to know his farm is inside a portfolio. The investor is the first to know his nation's next harvest. Mexico is the birthplace of corn. Its agricultural heritage is biological and cultural sovereignty. Today, foreign platforms map every field of Mexican corn, without a single agreement with the Mexican government. The cradle of corn is being watched from above. The Netherlands exports more agricultural data intelligence than most nations export grain. Its greenhouse technology, the most data-rich food production system on Earth. It proves that data-led farming creates dominance. The question is, dominance for whom? Saudi Arabia grows wheat in the desert using water the Arabian Peninsula cannot afford to lose. Its agricultural data systems are state-classified. Foreign satellite companies sold Riyadh crop intelligence, and Riyadh bought every data set available. Food security as sovereign strategy, data as desert armor. Canada began legislating farm data ownership in 2022. A first attempt at defining who owns what is generated from Canadian soil. The agricultural data companies deployed lobbyists within weeks. The bill has been amended 4 times. Food price inflation is now inseparable from data asymmetry. Nations without crop intelligence make worse trade decisions. Worse decisions mean food imports at peak prices, which means debt, a crushing weight that anchors nations to foreign creditors, which means submission, the ultimate goal of the data harvest, absolute control. The invisible harvest is complete for part 1. The world has been mapped and owned. The seeds of data domination have been planted in every nation. In part 2, we follow the money and the power behind it, because this story is only getting darker. Bayer AG paid $63 billion for Monsanto. They weren't buying seeds, they were buying the future. They were buying the largest agricultural data set ever assembled, 640 million acres of soil intelligence. The Climate Corporation's FieldView platform now covers 175 million acres. It tells farmers when to plant, what seed to buy, and how much to spend. Every recommendation feeds back into Bayer's proprietary intelligence and locks farmers deeper into a data-driven monopoly. Singapore imports over 90% of its food, yet it runs one of the most sophisticated agricultural data intelligence systems in the world. It buys the intelligence it cannot grow. Data sovereignty through wealth, not soil. At the WTO, no global framework governs agricultural data trade. It falls into an unregulated void between intellectual property and trade law. The nations with the most data want no framework. The nations with the least data have no leverage. In Indonesia, deforestation is being mapped, not to stop it, but to monetize the carbon credit potential of what replaces it. Agricultural data and ESG finance have fused into a new form of extraction. They measure what they destroy and sell the measurement. Israel turned desert agriculture into a data export industry. Its precision irrigation technology is deployed in 150 countries. But the data those deployments generate flows back to Israeli servers. Water is the product, data is the profit. Ukraine supplied 12% of the world's wheat before 2022. The global grain data models did not anticipate a war. Or did they anticipate the coming storm? Intelligence suggests the patterns were already moving. 3 major commodity funds shorted Ukrainian wheat months before the invasion. Quantitative hedge funds have built crop satellite surveillance systems. They can see a drought forming in Kansas before the USDA publishes a single report. They trade on it legally. Every famine they profit from is a policy failure they accelerated. In Kenya, foreign agricultural platforms arrived faster than regulations. Farmers signed data agreements in Swahili translated from English originals. The translation was incomplete. The data rights clause was missing entirely. This was not an accident. Every data node in the Rift Valley is a strategic asset. Japan's food self-sufficiency rate fell below 40% and kept falling. Its agricultural data infrastructure lags a decade behind South Korea. For a nation importing 60% of its calories, that data gap is existential. Tokyo is food dependent and data blind. The Sahel is the front line of climate-driven agricultural collapse. The data exists to predict every crop failure in the region. That data is held by foreign research consortia and UN agencies, not by the 135 million people who live and farm there. The Chicago Board of Trade sets the reference price for grain consumed by 4 billion people. Those prices are increasingly driven by algorithmic forecasts from private satellites. Public food policy is downstream of private data models. This is not democracy, this is data feudalism. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, the world's largest, holds stakes in agricultural data companies. Even ethical capital cannot resist the agricultural data opportunity. When ESG funds and sovereign wealth converge on agri-data, the asset class is beyond regulation. Norway farms the world financially. The Andes hold the world's largest repository of potato biodiversity. NGOs funded by agricultural corporations are mapping it all. Indigenous farmers receive technical support. The seed and soil data goes to Geneva. India launched its digital agriculture mission to reclaim data sovereignty. A national agri-stack, farmer IDs, land records, soil data, all state-managed. The ambition is massive, the implementation is contested, and the foreign platforms already embedded in Indian agriculture are not leaving. The world's agricultural intelligence is physically stored in 10 countries, most of it in the United States. When America turns off the data or restricts access, agricultural planning collapses globally. Cloud dependency is the new food dependency. China offered Zambia an agricultural data partnership, infrastructure, irrigation, crop tech, in exchange for data rights. Zambia has 58% of southern Africa's freshwater resources. China wanted the agricultural map, Zambia needed the money. Indonesia experienced its worst rice crop failure in 30 years in 2023. Government officials discovered they needed to log into a Singaporean platform to access Indonesian crop data. Their own field, someone else's database. Emergency response delayed by a licensing agreement. Humanitarian organizations spend 30% of their agricultural response budget on data subscriptions to platforms that often hold information donated by the very nations they serve. The data was taken without sovereignty agreements and is now resold to those trying to fix the problem it helped create. California almonds are the most data-intensive crop in the world. Every drop of water, every bee pollination event, every harvest weight, logged. The data advantage is real and measurable, and it prices competitors in 60 countries out of the export market. African agri-data is being packaged and sold to international investors before African governments can regulate it. Ghanaian smallholders become data points in someone else's portfolio. The farmer earns nothing from the transaction. The VC earns from round A. The platform earns from the data. Everyone earns, except the farmer. Traceability technology sounds like transparency, but it creates data flows that travel one direction only, away from the farmer. Colombian coffee growers receive certification premium. The data company receives perpetual field intelligence. Agricultural insurance is now entirely data-driven. Swiss Re, Munich Re, AXA, all run on proprietary crop intelligence. Premiums are set by algorithms the farmer cannot see, paid from losses the farmer cannot predict. The Andes hold the world's largest repository of potato biodiversity. NGOs funded by agricultural corporations are mapping it all. Indigenous farmers receive technical support. The seed and soil data goes to Geneva. Argentina grows food for 400 million people beyond its borders. Its agricultural data is overwhelmingly controlled by Bayer, Cargill, and Corteva. When Argentina attempted a data sovereignty clause, the IMF loan conditions resisted it. Food data and financial sovereignty are the same war? Canada proposed the Agricultural Data Trust model, a farmer-owned, government-governed data cooperative, where data flows from the field to a national platform, not to Chicago. It passed committee review in 2024. Implementation starts in 2026. Wageningen University runs the world's most comprehensive open agricultural dataset. It is the exception that proves the rule. Almost everything else in agricultural data is proprietary, siloed, and monetized. Open science is an island in a sea of extraction. The Nile water crisis showed the ultimate agricultural data weapon. Ethiopian dam operations are visible via satellite before Egyptian planners react. Real-time hydrological data, if owned, is upstream military intelligence. Egypt watched its water security deteriorate in real time on someone else's platform. Impact investors discovered that agricultural data and carbon markets are convergent. A single farm can generate crop yield data, carbon credits, insurance products, and commodity signals. Quad monetization from a single piece of land. The farmer sells his harvest, the platform sells his harvest 5 more times. Pakistan grows wheat for 230 million people under existential water stress. Its agricultural intelligence depends on NASA and foreign NGO platforms. When those platforms update their terms or restrict access, Pakistan plans blind. A nuclear power with borrowed crop data. The EU's Data Act of 2024 included agricultural data for the first time. Farmers were granted the right to access data generated from their own fields. Companies had 36 months to comply. John Deere's lawyers responded within 24 hours. China's Belt and Road Initiative is building agricultural infrastructure in 34 African nations. Each project comes with a data partnership. China maps the soil as it builds the irrigation. The infrastructure is visible, the data clause is not. The Pentagon now runs an agricultural security assessment unit. Its primary mission: map data dependencies for 40 allied nations. Which of our allies would collapse if their agricultural data access was revoked? The answer shocked the Joint Chiefs. Brazil chose State Agricultural Intelligence. Embrapa is the most sophisticated national agricultural research institution in the developing world. It competes directly with Bayer's Climate Corporation and wins on its own territory. Brazil's data sovereignty is not accidental. It was built over 50 years. The Lords of the Soil algorithm have established their dominion, but a counter-movement is forming. In Part 3, the world fights back. Or tries to. This is just the beginning of the sovereign data war. When China digitally mapped India's northern agricultural belts, Indian military planners noticed, crop yield intelligence and military logistics are the same data. India began treating agricultural data as classified national security information. 2 years late, strategic intelligence was now the primary focus of the Defense Command. China's military doctrine explicitly links agricultural data control to regional dominance. Their doctrine: who controls the region's crop data controls the region's governments. Food dependency is force without firing. The battle for the Indo-Pacific starts in the soil database. Every shipping lane is mapped and monitored. Russia builds food dependency before it builds military alliances. A parallel system for crop intelligence sharing among the nations of the global south. The grain comes with political strings embedded in the export agreement. Dependency is the diplomacy. The grain came with political strings embedded in the export agreement. The African Union launched its Agricultural Data Sovereignty Initiative in 2023. 54 nations, one framework, zero enforcement mechanism at launch. But the political will is real. Africa knows what is being taken and is deciding to fight. Africa knows what is being taken, it is deciding to fight. Vietnam launched its own agricultural monitoring satellite to stop paying American and French companies for data about Vietnamese rice fields. A nation of 97 million people decided its food intelligence was not for sale. The satellite cost $65 million. The data it replaced cost $80 million annually. European farmers began suing agricultural data platforms, citing GDPR violations in how farm data was aggregated without explicit consent. The first-class action covered 400,000 French, German, and Dutch farmers. It is still in discovery. Justice moved at institutional speed against Silicon Valley velocity. American farmers became data serfs without a revolution. They didn't sell their data. They accepted an update to their equipment software agreement and woke up with nothing left to own. Senator Amy Klobuchar introduced the Agricultural Data Protection Act in 2024. It would have required mandatory data portability and farmer consent for all secondary use. It was tabled after extensive lobbying by Bayer, Corteva, CNH Industrial, and AGCO. The bill died. The data extraction didn't. In February 2024, 30,000 European farmers blockaded capital cities across the continent. Among their demands, data rights equal to land rights. The European Commission promised consultation. The platforms promised compliance roadmaps. The farmers demanded more than just empty promises. South Korea built national agricultural AI before foreign platforms could colonize its farmland. The Korean model: state investment in data sovereignty before data dependency begins. Rural Development Administration owns the intelligence. Farmers access it freely. It costs $200 million. It prevented $4 billion in data dependency costs. Nigerian startup Farm Crowdy invented the agricultural data cooperative model. Farmers upload yield, soil, and weather data. The platform licenses it to insurers and input companies. Revenue is returned to the farmer. Not extracted from them. China proposed the BRICS Agricultural Data Accord, a parallel system for crop intelligence sharing among the nations of the global south. Independent of American satellites, European platforms, and Western financial infrastructure, 41 nations expressed initial interest. The CIA established an agricultural intelligence task force in 2021, not to grow food, to monitor who controls global crop data and use it. Agricultural data is now classified intelligence in 12 nations. The Cold War never ended, it just moved to the soil. Russia deployed food distribution as a political tool in Mali after the 2021 coup. Agricultural data systems, who gets grain, when, and where, were controlled by Russian operatives. Hunger became an instrument of loyalty. The data determined who ate. World Bank agricultural loans now carry data platform conditions for all member nations. Recipient nations must adopt approved Western agricultural data infrastructure. The aid comes with algorithmic strings. You cannot own the data the money generates. You can borrow the money. You cannot own the data the money generates. Taiwan imports 70% of its calories. Its agricultural data dependency mirrors its geopolitical vulnerability. If Beijing controls the South China Sea shipping lanes and the crop data systems of exporters, Taiwan's food sovereignty disappears before a single missile is fired. Farmers cannot access the data their own machines generate without paying John Deere for the privilege. It became a data sovereignty movement. The data was available, the access was not. The machine is theirs, the data isn't. That is the contract written in the digital age. ASEAN launched its agricultural digital framework in 2024. 10 nations, one regional approach to food data sovereignty. No enforcement, no budget, no timeline. It is but a beginning of a much larger struggle. Brazil's Supreme Court heard its first agricultural data ownership case in 2024. The question, does a machine's output data belong to the machine's owner or the machine's maker? The decision will affect 5 million Brazilian farms, and every agricultural data contract written after it. The legal landscape was changing forever. Private satellite constellations now image every agricultural zone on Earth daily. Planet Labs, Maxar, Black Sky, they see your harvest before you even begin the work. Regulators have no access. Farmers receive no disclosure. The sky is privately owned, and it never stops watching. The International Telecommunication Union proposed that nations have access rights to satellite imagery of their own territory. The United States and China both opposed it, for different reasons, with the same effect. The geopolitical divide remained absolute. The resolution failed. Global governance moved at a pace technology had long abandoned. The Philippines negotiated a bilateral agricultural data agreement with South Korea. South Korean technology, Philippine data, shared intelligence. A model for what South-South cooperation in agricultural data could look like. Small nations can choose partners. They cannot choose not to choose. The EU fined an agricultural data platform 127 million euros in 2024. The largest agricultural data privacy penalty in history. The fine was 127 million euros. The company appealed the ruling immediately. Lawyers began the long process and continued operations throughout the appeal process. In Colombia, agricultural data surveillance was built around the war on drugs. The infrastructure now maps food crops with the same precision. Government systems, USDA satellites, and private platforms all watching the same soil. Colombian farmers are the most observed smallholders on Earth. In Uganda, a generation of engineers decided not to wait for governance to catch up. They built an agricultural data cooperative platform, African-funded and African-governed. Farmer consent required for every data point, revenue shared to the originating farm. It scales slowly. The alternative scales extractively. The UN Security Council met on agricultural data as a strategic weapon for the first time in 2024. 3 resolutions were drafted in the UN Security Council session. None passed. Each was vetoed. The gridlock was absolute. Russia, China, and the United States each blocked different clauses for different reasons. Bangladesh experienced a crop failure that its own government couldn't quantify for 3 weeks. Because the real-time agricultural data was behind a commercial paywall. The IMF had to advance emergency funds before Bangladesh knew how much food it had lost. The data was available, the access was not. Submerged sovereignty in the face of crisis. Silicon Valley doesn't see this as a sovereignty issue. They see it as a market. Serving 90 nations with agricultural intelligence is, to them, global impact. Dependency is reframed as product market fit, a new era of corporate dominance. South African agricultural data was accessed by mining interests. Soil fertility records were used to identify farmland for future mining conversion. The farmer's crop data became the prospector's first report. He didn't know he was sitting on someone else's ambition. The EU's Food Safety Authority ran its first agricultural data failure scenario in 2024. If the top 3 agricultural data platforms went offline, European food logistics would fail. Not the farms, the logistics. The data layer is now more critical than the harvest itself. Brazil's INPE is the only public institution in the world that consistently maps large-scale agricultural deforestation in real time. When Bolsonaro tried to defund it, the international response was immediate. The world had come to depend on Brazilian public data for climate accountability. Public data infrastructure is as strategic as military infrastructure. An algorithm decided that Papua New Guinean highland farms are underperforming assets. That classification was used to justify a land conversion proposal. The farmers had no input. The algorithm had no context. Data without sovereignty is colonialism with better graphics. The Kigali Doctrine proposed a new legal framework. Agricultural data generated from a nation's soil is national heritage, not corporate asset. Exportable only with sovereign consent and benefit-sharing agreements. 15 African nations have signed. The WTO hasn't discussed it. Indian farmers began demanding data rights alongside land rights. The slogan was born in a field in Haryana. It spread to 12 states in 40 days. Because the truth travels faster than a satellite's orbital period, the sovereignty wars have no clear front line. They are fought in courtrooms, server rooms, and harvested fields. In Part 4, we reach the moment of reckoning. When data starvation threatens the food supply of nations that thought they were safe, the invisible architecture of agricultural data linking it all together in one global grid. The scenario nobody publicly planned for has arrived. A cyber attack on a nation's agricultural data infrastructure. The crops are in the ground. The harvest is real. But without the data layer, nobody knows where it is or where it needs to go. Vertical farms with local data infrastructure. 67 counties in 7 states lost real-time crop tracking for 18 days. Food logistics failures cost an estimated $2.4 billion. No farmer lost a crop, but the supply chain failed as if they had. When agricultural data systems fail, it is the poorest nations that bleed first. They depend on international data platforms to plan import contracts. No data means no contract timing. No timing means peak price exposure. When agricultural data systems fail, it is the poorest nations that bleed first. The G20 convened an emergency food security summit after the 2025 data attacks. For the first time, agricultural data governance was on the agenda as a security matter. Not an economic matter, not a trade matter, a security matter. The framing change was 15 years overdue. Singapore had already built the answer before the question became a crisis. Vertical farms with local data infrastructure. No satellite subscription for what grows in your own building. Food sovereignty is possible. It requires choosing it. African engineers built Open Farm Africa, a fully open-source agricultural intelligence platform. No corporate licensing, no data extraction clauses, funded by a coalition of African governments and diaspora investors. It was adopted by 3 nations within 6 months of launch. The FAO launched the World Soil Intelligence Library, a public open-access repository. Not because it wanted to, because it had to. The result? Food crises in Cuba are driven by resource scarcity, not data dependency. The result? Food crises in Cuba are driven by resource scarcity, not data dependency. Under legal, regulatory, and shareholder pressure, John Deere announced data portability in 2026. Farmers would be allowed to download and transfer their own field data. John Deere, Bayer, and Corteva have 18 months to comply or exit the market. It was a right they should have had since 2010. At the 2026 World Food Summit, a new resolution was proposed. That the right to food includes the right to access data about your own nation's agricultural capacity, the single largest act of agricultural data sovereignty in history, performed by a government, not a cooperative. The vote was the most contested in FAO history. India completed Phase 1 of its AgriStack program in 2026. 120 million farmers enrolled, soil records nationally held, data sovereignty legally defined. The largest agricultural data sovereignty project in history, 120 million farmers enrolled, soil records nationally held, data sovereignty legally defined. Ethiopia launched its National Agricultural Intelligence System without a single foreign platform, built on open-source tools, Chinese satellite partnerships, and German technical cooperation. The country that had experienced the worst famines of the 20th century now takes control. The nation of Ethiopia now forecasts its own agricultural destiny independently. By 2026, 61 nations had passed or were actively legislating agricultural data governance laws. By 2026, 61 nations had passed or were actively legislating agricultural data governance laws. Mandatory farmer data portability, national sovereignty clauses, foreign platform compliance requirements. Slowly, against enormous resistance, but the momentum is moving towards sovereignty. The farmer in Wales chose to opt out. He built his own sensor network, he chose a data cooperative, he owns every byte, he earns less in corporate platform efficiency. Having taken control of his own information, he sleeps much better at night. China achieved full agricultural data sovereignty, state model, by 2025. Its government sees 90 days of global grain price movements before markets do. This is not efficiency. This is strategic dominance in the global food market. And every nation that lacks the same capability negotiates from a position of blindness. The EU Agricultural Data Act passed in April 2026. Data sovereignty is now law. Mandatory farmer data portability, national sovereignty clauses, foreign platform compliance requirements. John Deere, Bayer, and Corteva have 18 months to comply or exit the market. The market is 450 million consumers. They will comply with the new regulations. The cost of data dependency in extreme weather is ultimately measured in human hunger. Every extreme weather event demands instant, accurate crop intelligence. Nations without it make wrong decisions during the narrowest windows for correct ones. The cost is measured in hunger. NASA released its full global crop stress dataset into the public domain in 2025, the single largest act of agricultural data sovereignty in history, performed by a government. Scientists from 188 nations downloaded it within 30 days. Open data works when the powerful choose it. India's drone agricultural program is the fastest growing national agri-data initiative on Earth. By 2026, 150,000 agricultural drones are registered with the national system. Every flight generates data, every data point stays in India. The sky is sovereign. By 2026, 150,000 agricultural drones are registered with the national system. At Davos 2026, a Ugandan smallholder farmer was invited to speak on agricultural data. He said, "I generate the data. I don't receive the value. If this happened to your company, you would call it theft." The entire room broke into applause for the farmer's courageous words. Ariel of Davos, snow-covered Swiss mountain town where global food policy is discussed in luxury. Agricultural data sovereignty is a right that must be reclaimed by everyone. It is a neighborhood issue. When communities control what they grow and the data about what they grow, they build real resilience. The smallest harvest, consciously tracked, is an act of resistance. Algeria powered its agricultural data sovereignty with its immense solar potential. Renewable energy and data independence are the same infrastructure investment. Nations that own their energy can own their data. This is true sovereignty. The Sahara is large enough to power the entire continent's food intelligence. International legal scholars proposed a global agricultural data rights convention, modeled on the law of the sea, but for the digital soil beneath our feet. No enforcement body yet, no signatory states yet, but the dialogue has started. But a text, a beginning, a demand for agricultural data rights. Corporate agricultural platforms are adapting to the new global reality. Not from conscience, from market pressure, regulatory force, and sovereign resistance. The new business model, license data services to nations that own their own data. Extraction to service, monopoly to partnership, the shift is real and partial. The first continental agricultural data sovereignty institution built and governed by Africans. The first continental agricultural data sovereignty institution built and governed by Africans. 54 member nations, one shared intelligence platform, 0 foreign data license dependency. It will take a decade to reach full capacity. It has already changed the negotiation. The FAO launched the World Soil Intelligence Library, a public open access repository. The most comprehensive soil dataset ever created, owned by no company. The most comprehensive soil dataset ever created, owned by no company. It is what the entire agricultural data industry should have been from the beginning. In the Peruvian Andes, indigenous farmers merged traditional ecological knowledge with satellite data. Their platform is theirs, built by community coders, hosted on community servers. It outperforms commercially available platforms for Andean crop predictions by 23%, because local knowledge, properly digitized, is more accurate than distant algorithms. The Global South signed its first Interregional Agricultural Data Compact in 2026. ASIN, the African Union, and CELAC, sharing crop intelligence between themselves. Bypassing Western platforms, building sovereign corridors. Because the alternative was permanent data dependency, the Kenyan farmer wakes before sunrise. His data is on a cooperative server in Nairobi. He owns it. He authorized its collection. He sees its value. This is not the exception. This is what must become the rule. In 2026, 68 nations still have no control over their own agricultural data. They grow the food themselves, yet they suffer the severe consequences of data asymmetry. They are not poor in land. They are not poor in agricultural capacity. They are poor in data sovereignty, and that poverty is artificially manufactured. The youth delegates to the UN Agricultural Data Assembly demanded binding enforcement, not endless consultation and not mere roadmaps. They demanded real enforcement. They cited the 40 years of agricultural data extraction their parents' generation accepted. They absolutely refused to accept it. The future was arriving ahead of schedule. 2026 became the monumental year of agricultural data sovereignty infrastructure. Nations stopped asking for permission and started building their own robust systems. Data sovereignty is not a gift given by corporate platforms. It is a fundamental right. It is a fundamental right, reclaimed with strategic investment and political will. For the first time since 2010, the agricultural data platforms are losing ground. Regulatory costs are rising rapidly, and sovereign alternatives are becoming highly credible. The business model of extracting farm intelligence without consent is becoming legally untenable. It is happening slowly and unevenly, but the era of extraction is finally ending. Zambia saw its own harvest numbers in real time for the first time in its history in 2026. Not from a foreign platform, but from their own national servers. Directly from its own sovereign national agricultural intelligence system. 42 years after independence. 42 years after independence, the data finally came home. Soil was never meant to be a commercial data set for extraction. It is the inheritance of generations who did not know they would be data mined. Every nation that reclaims its agricultural data sovereignty reclaims something much older. The right to know what you grow, the right to own what you make, the right to feed yourself on your terms. The agricultural data harvesters built an empire from soil they didn't own. But empires built on extracted data, on stolen intelligence, are not permanent. Nations waking up, farmers organizing, laws forming, and platforms retreating. The next harvest will be different. The data will come home. The question is only, how long will we allow the wait?